And we're glad you're watching. With us this morning is Javas Bigambo, who's a political analyst. Also with us is Onyango Oloo. He's a TNA Secretary General. We also have Moses Kajwang, who is the Senator at Homabay County. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. You're comfortable, happy?
Oh, yes.
No, that was a fast one. Keeping well? How was your past week? Did you manage to attend the open public address at the Kasarani Stadium?
Yes, I did. I went as a Kenyan to listen to the American president, and I think it was a weekend well spent, not just for me as an individual, but for Kenyans. It was a good thing to see a Kenyan American come back home and talk to his own people and tell us the things that we've probably been saying but using a different tone, and he said it in the right tone and it resonated with people. And I'm also happy that a lot of young entrepreneurs got linkages and partnerships with American companies, and a lot of money was also left in Kenya. So what matters now is how we are going to take advantage of that moment so that we can move our country forward.
Yeah. How do you sum up those 3 days, Oloo, that Obama was here, that we also had the GES happening?
It was simply wonderful. It was a confirmation of the continued faith that the international community continue to have in this great country, and a resounding mandate to the government that it is doing a commendable job.
Javas?
Well, I think it was a moment in time that will linger across history, that had various perspectives that fell upon the shoulders of Kenyans and leaders like a wet blanket. And I think maybe a departure from Senator Kajwang's position, I think it was an address that should have left every Kenyan and every leader very disturbed because of various issues that the president spoke to.
Yeah, disturbed why?
One, because President Obama spoke to the critical issues that touch on the nerve endings of the governance and the state of this nation.
Right.
To do with governance, to do with the corruption, things that we know each day and know at the wellness of this nation, leaving it sick.
Okay, let's begin with one of the issues that he spoke about, and that is clamping down on, some of this space that the Constitution has given. And I'll throw this to you, Onyango Oloo, because he talked about, this broad paint brush type of approach where you lump everyone else in one basket in terms of condemning, and he talked about the risks of that, because then you have marginalized people on one end feeling that nobody cares about us, and then it has a trickle effect that would be unwanted or undesired from the very beginning. And analysts have come out to say that in that particular case, he was talking about what happened in Isli, and that Salama Watch, what is it called? Salama Watch what?
After Westgate? After
Westgate, Usalama Watch. So what for you do you see that as? Him coming out to say that, did the government in fact in that particular time fail?
Let me say that sometimes issues to do with government become very challenging because of execution. From the point instructions are given to execution, there could be lapses. But let us also accept that sometimes, while I do not say that the President of the United States could have been wrong in his assessment, the position is that at that time it was imperative upon the government that we had to get down to the bottom of these insecurity issues, and unfortunately, as was accepted by the president of this country, that we have challenges in issues to do with security, for which we are reaching out to our partners to assist. Maybe our personnel were not as equipped as they are supposed to be intellectually and technologically. So sometimes we may use means that are not as apt as we would wish to. But there is an acknowledgement that we continue to advance in terms of technology, we continue to advance in terms of how we interrogate suspects, how we deal with communities, how we deal with people, so that profiling becomes a thing of the past, profiling of the entire communities or entire regions. But we have come from somewhere. We are headed somewhere. There are challenges which we acknowledge and accept are still with us, but we are moving.
And Senator, the President, we had him saying we are learning, we are growing, we'll get better. So do you have confidence that from some of those areas that there might have been some failures, that things will look better going forward? Yeah,
there have definitely been failures, Sophia. When you look at our response to some of the issues that we've come across as a nation, starting from Westgate, you've talked about Usalama Watch. We went to Isili and swept away Somalis and took them to what was akin to a concentration camp. We lumped them in a stadium on grounds that we were screening them. When you look at subsequent terror attacks, you look at Mpeketoni. After that, we went to mosques and raided mosques, and there are some imams who have died mysteriously, and today we don't know how they died. Look at Garissa. After Garissa, we decided we are putting up a wall between Kenya and Somalia. I don't know how far that wall has gone, how the tendering was done. So yes, there have been a lot of failures. The President was humble enough to say that we are learning, and we wait to see what those lessons are going to translate to. Now, on the earlier point about the content of President Obama's speech, I hold the view that what President Obama said has been said previously in this country by different voices. It is only the tone and maybe the context within these have been discussed that has been different. President Obama spoke very candidly about ethnicity. We in the opposition have been talking about ethnicity. Nobody in Kenya does not know that ethnicity is a problem that will lead to genocide. Obama spoke about corruption. Everyone in this country has been talking about corruption, including the president. Obama talked about exclusion of minorities. He talked about challenges of insecurity. But probably the only area where he was not very spot on was when he gave an affirmation that the media in this country is extremely free and that there is a lot of space for the media to operate. We know that the security laws that were passed in Parliament was meant to claw back some of the gains that the media has made. But the point is, Obama said the things we know. It is just that we respect him, and he's got a lot of good...
Were you expecting him to say things we don't know, but isn't he supposed to then be in the know of what's happening and speak of the things you know?
Well, we took what he said very positively, and you know, even the government is saying, you know, Obama spoke well, but when the opposition says the same things, they are dismissed as people who are bitter, who are still smarting from an electoral defeat. I think we need to get to the point where we do not focus on the messenger, but we focus on the message. Obama in this case did both very well. He delivered the message excellently, and he was also a very polished messenger.
Okay. Javas.
Well, I think I must appreciate that President Obama's remarks were an invitation to national consciousness. A consciousness that we have not been far removed from, but we have deliberately and consciously relegated to the backwaters. And the difference here comes in, you know, when you look at it through these lenses, that while the message itself may not be necessarily new, but when one person who is deemed clean speaks to a particular message, it varies, you know, compared to a person who speaks about the same message, but you know, has got you know, the lingering allegations of you know, the issues to which you're speaking about.
So you're saying, for example, in corruption, Obama comes and speaks about it, seen to be clean. Opposition in Kenya have been speaking about it, but they have their own issues as well.
Fact is that when you look at President Obama, we have not, as a nation and even as a world, come to a point where allegations have been thrown his way of being corrupt, inept, etc. But here in Kenya, we know very well that if you were to look at all the sides of the, you know, the leadership, whether it's the Jubilee coalition, whether it's the CORD coalition, you realize that various leaders in those sections, in those coalitions, have had allegations. And it's important that to speak authoritatively or to speak ex cathedra on such issues of corruption, then one needs not necessarily to be spotlessly clean, but to have that consciousness that you sweep your frontier before you speak to those issues. I think while the CORD coalition is all right to laud the message by President Obama, it's important, for example, to have the CORD coalition and even the Jubilee coalition to speak or to come out and shed light on the issues, thematic issues that President Obama spoke to, so that as a nation we find ourselves progressing. While even President Kenyatta acknowledged and appreciated that as a nation we are learning and we are growing, but we know in every context of human existence, growth must be calibrated. there are all those milestones that one must pass with, in respect to time. So that learning itself must be calibrated, and we must be seen to be progressing as a nation.
All right, Senator Kajwang, I'll ask you this because the analysts who've argued that ahead of his visit, the opposition, had been in this space where they looked forward to engaging with him. And even in the studio, many of the opposition leaders I interviewed said, they will raise the issues that are affecting the country. And so in this particular meeting that they had with President Obama, they went ahead to say press government, and at least by his own admission, on several issues, and he turned it on its head, pretty much saying, you're saying press, but when you are in government, you are the same person saying steer clear. So was it smart to use this occasion to say press government? I mean, he is a president of another country, so press meaning what? To do what exactly?
President Obama and America is a superpower, and they've got all this information. By the time Obama was planning to come to Kenya, he had already been briefed on the issues that were going on in Kenya. After all, Obama has got Kenyan linkages. In fact, Auma could have whispered to him what the issues on the ground are. So one should not expect that we were going to tell Obama about Kenya on the day he arrived in Kenya. I think that was a presumptuous position, that President Obama does not know what happens in Kenya. In fact, in diplomacy, by the time a president flies over the Atlantic to come to Africa, to an African country, he is already very well briefed about the issues.
Granted, but the opposition leaders still took that opportunity to then take it on themselves to say press government on this and this issue.
Well, so it was, Sophia, if you do remember, and if you look at the synchronization of the meetings, the opposition met President Obama after he had addressed the nation. By that time, the opposition realized that President Obama had spoken about all the issues that they would have brought to his attention. Because, and I want to tell you, no one in his right frame of mind was going to discuss issues of Waiguru or issues of Issa Kassan with President Obama. Those are local domestic issues. Now, I've had an opportunity to speak with the opposition leaders who met President Obama, and the context within which those remarks were made was in a very light note. But let me say this. It didn't
appear light when Obama
he even made it in a light note when he was talking to civil society. And I've spoken with the people who sat with Obama, and it was in a very light note. But let me make a point. Let me make a point on this, Sophia. And let me bring in this theory of the blind man and the elephant. Sometimes truth depends on where you are standing. In fact, if you are a blind person and you are standing behind an elephant, you'll most likely hold the tail, and you'll think the elephant is a tail. If you are standing in front, you'll think the elephant is a tusk.
Was he making it in a light note because it's a light issue, or is it a light note because he thinks the opposition leaders thought he does not know the real issues at hand? So was it a light note towards, just a comment in passing that's not serious, but because he already knows, but someone here is assuming he doesn't, and that he needs to play a certain role?
No, the opposition did not assume that Obama did not know what was going on in Kenya. Obama was extremely well briefed, and he was very... let me just finalize this point and tell you why I was bringing in the story of the blind man and the elephant. The truth, wherever it sits, does not change. It is our perception of the truth that changes. We should not shoot the messenger. If the opposition says there's corruption in this Kenya, and there's nepotism, and there's ethnicity, and there's insecurity, does the fact change because the person saying it could have been engaged in it? Absolutely not. Let us focus on the message that the opposition and President Obama wanted to pass. And the message that Obama passed to the nation is exactly what was contained in the memorandum that the opposition presented
so,
to Obama.
Oloo, you have Senator Kajwang saying that it was a light note from President Obama. It's the same thing we had the opposition leaders say in a press conference, that, he wasn't serious about what he was saying.
That's a very, very blatant, should I say, outright...
no, but there was no one from Jubilee in that meeting. And I don't think Onyango has spoken with the CORD leader.
Am I allowed to talk?
Which is an opportunity.
Okay, let him finish. She allowed you to talk.
That is a blatant and outright misrepresentation of what did take place. I may not have been in that meeting, but I did watch Obama himself talk to the nation and to the world. And it was simple and clear. Period. The opposition goofed. The President of the United States of America made it clearly that the opposition lacked moral and ethical grounds on which to advance issues they were purporting to advance before him. his position was, these very gentlemen are now asking me to intervene, to press on certain issues, which when we tried to intervene on, when they were in government, they said we had no basis on which to intervene. It is interesting to see my friend here say that there were things that they thought were internal and therefore should not have been brought before Obama. What are internal and what is not internal? Issues of corruption, whether they be internal, issues to do with governance, all these things are internal. And the issues that affect us as Kenyans. And that is why probably the opposition wanted to ask the President of the United States to intervene. But the President is saying, look, and this is what we have been saying day in, day out as the government, that these gentlemen who want to appear to Kenyans as holier than thou, as men who are ready to hold reins of government, are not only incompetent, they lack the moral and ethical basis to even champion the rights of the people. We have constantly repeated that these men are turncoats, they are hypocrites, that what they have done yesterday, they'll come and say today should not be done. No wonder we say, when you look at the CORD leadership, we lost our whole embassy when one of them was a minister for foreign affairs. We lost massive chunks of land to one of them in NYS saga. We have several complaints, including misleading our whole community to grab parcels of land.
Of course, it's allegations that they're not here to.
I think Onyango Oloo as a lawyer is treading on very dangerous grounds by making some very serious allegations.
That's what I'm saying. They're not here
he needs to be careful because someone might take
to those allegations. Let's listen from Javas. Your thoughts on what the two gentlemen have said?
Well, first, I think President Obama's remarks were not any less featherweight, and he did not intend to joke around with any of his remarks, because he knows as a global leader, his remarks are taken seriously wherever he goes.
So it was not on a light note in your opinion?
Well, I think it in fact was on a heavy note, not at all any light, because there's issues that speak to the character of leadership of the leaders that he had met earlier, and that's what he was trying to address. And he was just trying to throw that message to leaders of the civil society, even though it was not necessarily perhaps meant to, for them, but he wanted them to come to that realization. There is an African proverb that a bird whose feathers are used for sacrifice must fly with caution. And I think in respect to President Obama's remarks and his visit, maybe it's possible that members of the opposition expected possibly a dress down of the government by President Obama. It's possible. It's also possible that maybe the CORD coalition could have expected that the remarks of President Obama could have inclined on a lecture as a big brother. But of course we know that that was not necessarily the case. Thing is that the issues that President Obama spoke to, it is what we know very well that the CORD leaders and even the Jubilee leaders must see how they can coordinate their efforts to make sure that a nation stands tall, whether there are issues of discrimination, issues of equity, issues of women's rights, and all these issues, because they speak to some of the competing schools of thought that we know about. And for example, when you look at the analysis of President Obama's remarks, why is it that the leaders of this nation are very selective? They are only picking certain aspects of the president's remarks and not coming out to see how they can tap into some of the critical thematic issues that the president spoke to, and see how as a nation focus and energy can be directed to that for purposes of moving to the higher ground.
Is a victory for opposition, and to see that they are keeping government in check, to bring down and completely paint and muddy the president? Because there are those who argue that can there be a common ground found, that the interests of the country are above all of this ambition for political office, that yes, you want to be this, you want to be this, that there can be that ground found that yes, we disagree, but country remains above everything else and we can agree on some things.
Yeah, Sophia, that's why just about 1.5 years back, the opposition made a proposal, an overture to the government and said, let's dialogue. Let's sit down and dialogue about these issues that affect the nation. And the issues that we listed for dialogue are the same issues that Obama raised. We raise issues of ethnicity, issues of corruption, issues of electoral reform, and issues of insecurity. And those are the same critical issues that Obama spoke about, in addition to the economic and growth issues that he spoke about when he was around. What happened? We were dismissed as people who were seeking attention.
But let me ask you this.
At that point, it was the country that we are putting forward. Remember, Sophia, if this country goes down the route of genocide, which can easily happen if we continue this ethnic profiling, I will not have somewhere to take my children where they can be citizens. So at the end of the day, whether we're in the opposition or in the ruling coalition, this is the motherland.
So you're saying no progress on those issues has happened because there has not been dialogue, and you believe if dialogue happens, then Kenya will look better in terms of those 4 areas you've mentioned? Yes, because the first option was dialogue. When that did not happen, we considered constitutional reforms. I can tell you, Sophia, this country has got an excellent constitution, which, if it was to be implemented properly, then some of these issues we are talking about would be history. The only problem is that we want to write more laws and create more institutions and create more conditions, but we do not have the will to apply. Yes, right now, we have consolidated all those issues we wanted to be part of the national dialogue into a draft bill, which we are calling Okoa Kenya. I can tell you, right now we have collected 1 million signatures, and we'll be moving to the next stage towards taking this to the county assemblies and bringing it to the National Assembly and to Senate, and probably make it law. And if that doesn't happen, go into a referendum. But I can tell you that our problems in this country is not a lack of legislation. It is just that we cannot sit down. When Onyango and I sit down, we look at each other as Jubilee and CORD rather than as Kenyans, and forget that this country is for all of us. And the issue of the message and the messenger, I cannot get tired of repeating this. It does not matter whether the person saying that something is wrong is drunk or is mad or is a murderer. If the truth is that something is wrong, then but didn't the same Obama hail the president and say that he has made some great strides and kicked off the war against corruption? So on one hand, it's a recognized challenge across the board, but on the same hand, that same messenger you're talking about comes out and says, at least we are giving credence to where we have seen at least pronouncements made
we have not said that everything in this country is bad.
But you just said that things are so bad that they could degenerate to genocide. That's a strong statement.
I've pinpointed the specific areas where we need to provide urgent attention. Okay. There are things that the Jubilee government is doing, which is right. And of course, there are continuation of the projects inherited from the Grand Coalition government. Things like SGR, things like LAPSET, things like Green Power, which was part of Obama's issues, things like the youth and women funds, and even things like NYS. They were not just created the other day. I'm happy that there is some sense of continuity in these projects, but there are certain specific issues. Pareto's principle, the 20%, which if we do not address, will kill the entire nation.
Okay.
Sophia, I get so disturbed when my colleague constantly bring words that are probably meant to twist or intimidate, or probably is a way of trying to get the government to talk to them. When you bring words such as concentration camps, you bring words such as genocide without justification. We have not reached there. We are not going there as a country. And let me make it clear. When the opposition came with issues of dialogue, we had just come out of elections. And our position was, for what purpose do we go for elections? We go for elections so that we can constitute our parliament, so that we can constitute the county assemblies. These county assemblies and our parliament, both the Senate and the national assemblies, are for us for dialogue. They provide a platform through which different shades of opinion are canvassed, discussed, debated, and consensus are reached at. Why should a man or a woman participate in an election, win or lose, and thereafter demand that I want people to talk outside parliament on specific issues?
But we saw the president in a public, it was Madaraka Day, I think, or Jamhuri, come out and say, I'm willing to dialogue. And then after a PG meeting, come out and then change tune. So as president, he was willing to have a sit down with this.
As a president, as a citizen, he can talk with any citizen. He can talk with our institution. But we are saying, as a people, as a country, we have institutions of dialogue. These institutions of dialogue are our assemblies, the county assemblies, the Senate, and the National Assembly. And they are established in our constitution specifically for that purpose, to discuss issues and legislate them, pass motions that affect us as a people.
Legislation is a very specific and narrow function. Legislation is not an issue of national dialogue to the extent that we are talking about. Sophia, you noticed that Obama did not address the institution of parliament because of the issues of levels of confidence that Kenyans have in this institution called parliament. Look at statistics. Less than 20% of parliamentarians make their way back. It could be 30 to 20%. That tells you something about the kind of choices we make as a nation. Look at the reports coming out today that members of the budget committee of the National Assembly have awarded themselves 3 billion shillings for preferential projects. It tells you the crisis of confidence that
so you're saying the system set up in law are not working, and so therefore he's suggesting dialogue should be the way.
But Kenyans who elect them.
Well, it's Kenyans who vote them out. 5 years later. I do not think Parliament is the right institution for dialogue. It is the right institution for legislation. And that is the role of Parliament.
Can legislation happen without dialogue?
Well, legislation is a very specific. It's a very, look at Senate, for example, where I sit. I can only do legislation on matters to do with the county. Now, look at the questions we want to bring about on dialogue, on inclusivity, etc. The scope of Parliament is too limited for that kind of broad-based national
discussion. Just for my colleague talk there, German. It is very interesting to hear my friend here say that Parliament is only limited to legislation. Parliament plays oversight role. Parliament passes motions which are not necessarily legislative in nature. So let us be sincere with ourselves and all that.
And dialogue, where the Constitution does dialogue appear as a role of Parliament?
Well, I have brought myself to the realization that dialogue is important. It's paramount. But it must not be the only option on the table. And you see, when you look at the options that are necessary for the progress of this country, you realize that the legislation that Senator Kajwang is talking about is important, but there are a couple of other elements, other factors that must be considered. Now, with the benefit of retrospect at President Obama's remarks, how come that after he had done it, nearly every Kenyan stood up and said, we have been greatly inspired? Then one wants to ask, is it possible that Kenyans are not consistently inspired by our leaders? And is it possible that leaders could depart from the negativistic perspectives or approaches that they give to leadership? While I appreciate, for example, the remarks by Senator Kajwang, imagining that it's possible for a nation to degenerate and sink into genocide is, of course, we know, worrying. But suppose we could look at it from the other side of the coin. That what must we do as a nation to rise beyond the fears that face even other nations in the region, so that we find ourselves constantly aiming or inclined to perceptions, remarks that make us work towards the greatness of our nation. And I think here, looking at all those issues that have been addressed and where we stand as a nation, it is important that the leaders not only discuss issues that are holding us back, but also possible ways or interventions.
So you'd have that happen in what kind of a platform? One,
at the popular level, the people's, the mass level. We need to have various approaches to dialogue of the common citizens, because there is no way we can say that we want a discussion at the top level with the exclusion of the people. We also need to find, leaders finding reason.
So how does that look like? Sorry, is it county hall meetings? What is that? Is it a big rally? What does that look like?
One, of course, county hall meetings could work, but we know very well that even with the provision of the Constitution in public participation and various avenues therein, it is possible that communities could start engaging, start dialogue at community level, so that we start seeing what is it that is important to communities, to sub-counties, to counties and whatnot. Not just issues critical to the constitutional devolution alone, but issues that speak to the social cohesion of a people. So all these things are, some of course, all of them are woven by, politics or the political character of our nation. It's important that these discussions or dialogue takes place at various levels. Not the kind of dialogue that we are seeing being agitated for in Kenya today, where it's only dialogue at the top level.
And where it's dialogue that is seen to be preconditioned, as we've seen many people write. So can that call for dialogue change so that it's not seen that you're calling for dialogue, but only in the case or in the event this and this is met?
You know, I'm glad Onyango is here, and he's a chairman of a very powerful party. I want to send him to his party leader, who is the president, that we are genuine in our call for dialogue. We cannot afford a situation where Kenya fails, because if Kenya fails, we all fail. We want Kenya to succeed. And I think these differences, being a jubilant or a coded person, these are very artificial. These are very artificial differences. In fact, come the next elections, chances are that you will not be jubilated. You will be a Japanese and not a jubilant anymore. Okay. These are really temporal differences. I think the bigger concern and the bigger interest is Kenya. We are very genuine, and I do not believe that constitutional and legal reforms is a solution to ethnicity and corruption. It requires the goodwill of all Kenyans. And I tell you, Onyango, if you do this, you will probably say, these are good guys, let them go ahead in 2017. Otherwise, we shall hammer you at the next polls.
Briefly.
Just briefly on that, let me say, we have never been opposed to dialogue per se. But we are saying there are issues, as Javan is saying, that could be subject to dialogue. Issues to do with community conflicts, issues to do with infighting for resource allocations in the areas. But the issues that the opposition wanted to dialogue with the government were issues that we said squarely fell within the mandate of institutions that have been competently established.
Okay.
Otherwise, if we do this dialogue they are talking about, after dialogue, what next?
All right. Let's talk about one of the issues that was the elephant in the room and that both presidents addressed in that press conference, the LGBT issue. Of course, that question from the journalist, President Obama saying he remains unequivocal about his position, and then there's President Kenyatta's response. Your thoughts on what was said by President Uhuru Kenyatta?
Well, we know very well that that is nearly a polarizing subject, especially on this part of the earth. And President Obama, with where he's coming from, we know very well that that is a critical issue, you know, in the eyes of the masses in the West. And that is why he's, in fact, even very passionate about. And we have seen him change positions. That prior to becoming president, and I think when he was a junior senator of Illinois, his position was against gay marriage. But we have seen, and it's recorded, him admitting that he has changed his position to where he stands presently. And President Kenyatta's remarks were also very apt and clear that as a nation, while that could be an issue of global reflection, Kenyans do not take it as a critical issue right now because of the issues that are paramount and which are the issues of the focal point of our nation, livelihood and whatnot, the challenges we are facing with the government and whatnot. But I think it is, while it's an issue that is non-core perceptively so, it is something that we know very well touches on the fabric of society, and we cannot cast a blind eye on. It's an issue that we know families, even religions have been affected, and they have discussed, and they have taken even strong emotive positions. And I think moving forward, as it remains a non-core issue, it may be important that it comes for discussion at some point.
Senator Kajwang, he says non-core. I saw a discussion on social media, Twitter to be specific, saying it's a non-core for other people. The president may say non-issue, but for the people under the umbrella of LGBT, it's a very much core issue.
I believe every society and every organization must define the values, its values. Now, we tend to say that Kenya is this Christian society which does not accept things like homosexuality. Of course, Christianity is also an import, so the same way homosexuality is an import. So the Christianity argument really does not hold. For me, there are two things here. There's the issue of human rights. Does someone have the right to take whatever decision they want to take, provided that they're not infringing on my own rights? provided, giving the same example that President Obama used. They are paying their taxes, they are upright citizens, they are doing everything, they are even going to church and tithing, and then they've made a decision that they are going to love someone of the same gender. I mean, from a human rights perspective, it is not fair to discriminate against that person on that basis. However, as a nation, what kind of values do we want to espouse and entrench? And I believe there has to be a delicate balance between the value system of a nation and issues of human rights. From a human rights perspective, it is not fair to discriminate against people who profess to be gays. But from a value system perspective, what kind of value system structure do we want to build as a nation?
So what then becomes the way
nation,
forward? Yes.
I believe that as Kenya, and we put it very clearly in the Constitution, that marriage shall be between two adults of the opposite sex. And it is very, very clear in the Constitution. Two adults of the opposite sex, because we look at marriage as an institution that is necessary for the perpetuation of generations, and it is these generations that will provide the labor force, it will be the population that is going to push this nation forward.
So you agree with the President's position?
I agree with the President's position that we, from a values perspective, that is not an issue that Kenyans are willing to open up to or to compromise on at this point in time.
Okay. Oloo.
Sophia, it's very unfortunate that the opposition is conflicted on issue of gayism between value issues and human rights issues. For us in the government, we are clear. This is a non-issue. This is an issue that is not central to us, wherein the Pokots and the Turkanas are still fighting for livelihoods, when issues of terrorism are still affecting us.
But will there ever come a time, Oloo, that all of these issues are settled? Terrorism, security will always constantly need to be vigilant. On the other hand, there are these people who would quote-unquote argue you're eroding on their freedoms or their rights to be who they feel that they're meant to be.
I'm telling you, as a government, as parties, as the Jubilee Coalition, we formed this government based on certain values and a manifesto that we presented to the people of Kenya. And we are saying issues of gayism are not core to us. They are not issues we want to attend to. The opposition may be conflicted between human rights and gayism. For us, we are clear. These are not the issues upon which we were installed in government. We want to attend to issues of insecurities, issues of corruption, issues that affect our people generally and that are central towards the progress of this country and growth to the next level.
Sophia, I think it is intellectual and ideological laziness to dismiss matters as non-issues. At the very minimum, we need to understand the ideological position of the ruling coalition on this matter. Because you don't just say it's an issue. Well, there could be a few Kenyans who aspire or who are already in that space. I think it is very, very important to put forth an intellectual position on that. Not just to say, saying it is an issue is burying the head in the sand.
All right, let's move this along to State Auditor's expose triggers outrage and shock. So according to the Auditor General, 67 billion shillings cannot be accounted for. You've seen the Attorney General come out and say this is malice because we've already explained all of these questions that had been raised, queries, and we are good. You have your chairman, party chairman, TNA Sakaja, saying again, this is perhaps pretty much after GES and the high that the government and Kenya in general was in, to then, you know, muddy it all up and say that things are not as good as they look. So the Auditor General, a man with an agenda?
Well, personally, I take it that the Auditor General must not rise to be an accountability billboard. That his is just to project the fears and the challenges and the dangers that are there, and then it ends there. I think time has come where we must see how to pull our socks from around the anklet. From the advent of devolution, there has been audit after audit, report after report from the Auditor General's office. None of it has seen successful prosecution of those leaders or individuals or officers that have failed to account to the missing billions. Question of corruption comes in handy. And I think if it is necessary for the Office of the Auditor General, well, maybe it's something that requires debate at various institutional levels, to get prosecutorial powers or investigative powers, or rather prosecutorial powers, then let's see how to take that discussion forward. But the question of just making announcements, of course they're not just alarmist announcements, but they're announcements that disturb all of us. But leaving it there, I think we need to come to a point where reports from Auditor General get to be actioned.
It's because the issue and concern here is not the fact that there is this report and out there. They should have these reports. The question is, when it's the same Auditor General Office that has given these clearance certificates, and these are only given after several questions are answered, and then you release again this report, you know, saying that these questions have not been answered, isn't that double speak right there, Senator Kajwang?
Not really, because look at the audit process. The auditors will go to the ground, they'll talk to the concerned ministries, they will ask for evidence. And if they get evidence, they make their opinion. And if they don't get evidence, they write the kind of stuff that they've written over the 66 billion. So the auditor, yes, can give an opinion, but the auditor, it is part of his mandate to point out where there was no evidence to support the expenditure. And I think, and just yesterday, I was sitting at a Senate Public Accounts Committee meeting that was interrogating the accounts of Homabay County, and the governor for Homabay submitted himself before the Senate. A number of the issues that had been raised in the initial audit report, some of the issues were very alarming. You are looking at huge amounts of money that could not be accounted for. But then the county executive presented a huge dossier of evidence. And as a committee, we said, auditor and executive, you must sit together and go through that bulk of evidence and bring us a fresh report. I think that should be what applies in this particular case. That 66 billion, if the government cannot produce evidence to account for it, then we shall pick it. I'm quite hesitant to start slamming the government right now for the loss of 66 billion, because I know the audit process. Until these ministries appear before the Public Accounts Committee, it will be very difficult to say that that is a final position. So I believe we are in that process of rationalization. But it is worrying also that when the auditors go to the field, they are not being furnished with the evidence that is required. When evidence is not there when it's required, and it becomes... But
how are these clearance certificates being issued on one hand, and then again on one hand there's the argument that they're not being furnished? Because how will one happen without the other is the question.
The clearance certificate could be on the bigger picture, but there could be the other smaller issues, the smaller salient issues. An auditor can give a qualified or unqualified opinion, but it does not mean that the smaller issues, the salient issues, have not been taken into account. But the point I was trying to make is that sometimes when we wait for evidence to be produced later, that evidence could be manufactured. So we should not say that this 66 billion can be mitigated by the production of evidence, because people can sit somewhere and manufacture.
So hold up.
That
so you're
evidence.
saying on one hand you're not quick to judge government, then you're saying on the other hand government could cook to substantiate this.
No, I'm just saying there's a tendency, there's a possibility that that can happen. I don't think the Jubilee government has become as crookish as to forge receipts and accountability. Okay. I will give them the benefit of doubt on that.
Yes, Oloo. Let's
thank you so much. This issue about the auditor is worrying, because year in, year out, huge sums are splashed onto us as money that are unaccounted for. But if you have ever been subjected to the auditing process, then you wonder whether what is presented to the Auditor General is different from what these men and women usually do on the field. Because ordinarily they write to you first the kind of documents they require from you, which you make available. Then they come and look at those books and raise audit queries. Then you are given a chance to respond to those audit queries. If you respond effectively and convincingly, then they issue you with the certificate of clearance that you have got good books. So it is worrying that the office of the auditor will go through all that rigorous process, issue that certificate, and then the next day come and say that money cannot be accounted for. It is simply putting Kenyans and the leadership in a very awkward position. We don't know whether to go for that person who will waive to us a clearance certificate, or to believe the Auditor General. What we would only ask for, beside asking Parliament to play its role as it has always played, is that the Auditor General, before presenting his report, should take into consideration the audit query, the response to the audit queries raised by his office, and before issuing the clearance certificate, he should be convinced that queries have been answered satisfactorily. Otherwise, we could end up jeopardizing careers of very innocent people in the service.
Yeah, because that's a huge implication this has, that once you have this blanket condemnation and said all of this money was lost, the perception already, people are thinking now these are just, you know, people who stolen, you come back, you have the sentiments that Senator is expressing that someone cooked something somewhere to be able to clear themselves.
Well, very true. And point is then that are we asking the right questions? Because with that kind of report, it speaks to economic hemorrhage. And that worries any nation, looking at the kind of amounts that we even need to see how to finance various structural progress in our development projects that we are focused on as a country. So the question is, when the Auditor General issues clearance certificates, what exactly is he clearing? Is he clearing inconsistencies? Is he clearing what is veritable? These are questions that I think we need also to ask. And Senator Kajwang sitting, you know, in the Senate, which we know very well that it's the guardian of devolution as expected by the Constitution. We need to, you know, find that we must not be comfortable with various positions, so that Senator Kajwang should not find himself oscillating between positions that maybe some he's comfortable with, some that he's not. Because look at the preparation to President Obama's homecoming, and you find that one county spent, you know, colossal amounts on various issues, including, I think, furnishing the home of a private citizen. One wants to ask questions that, to what extent and what reason informed public money being used on a private citizen's home, etc., and such issues. These are important questions that Senate, and including Senator Kajwang, should be asking the right questions, and not feeling comfortable about whether this, you know, the Auditor General could be given room to see how to maneuver his space.
I don't think there's any comfort zone, Sophia, and I think these issues, when they're interrogated by the assemblies and the Auditor General and they come to us as Senate, we shall act on them properly. But I just want to say that we went to the international market and floated a sovereign bond and raised $2 billion US. That's about 200 billion Kenya shillings. Corruption is costing this country, I think there are studies that state that we lose about 1/3 of revenues to corruption. That is much more than the money we went to borrow in the international market. The standard gauge railway will take about 350 billion Kenya shillings. That is much less than what we are losing as far as corruption is concerned. If there was one legacy, one signature legacy that this government could give Kenyans, it would be a committed, a single-faced. You know, the government speaks on both mouths when it comes to corruption. They are holy ministers and ministers who are told to go and defend themselves in a court of law. There are those who defend themselves in media and accompanied by a group of legislators to defend themselves before a parliamentary committee. There are those who are told to go and defend themselves in the court. You cannot speak on from both sides of the mouth when it comes to corruption. I wish that the president could rally all Kenyans, and it is not just a Jubilee thing. Because we are not saying that it is Jubilee people who give bribes. It is all Kenyans who give bribes. But the leadership, the social contract we have is that we've got a government that needs to lead from the front and rally all Kenyans. And even if we are doing a national dialogue just to deal with the issue of corruption.
By doing what? How do they lead from the front? What does he do?
No, I've just talked about speaking from both sides of the mouth, because you are selective in your prosecution. And President Obama talked about it.
Selective how?
You are selective you tell some ministers that since you have been suspected of corruption, go and defend yourself in court. And there are others who are also suspected of corruption, and you tell them that, no, you defend yourself from the office. Obama spoke about corruption, like, and I was at Kasarani.
So like who and who, just so that we're clear?
Well, so that would be able to respond.
Like Waiguru, for example.
I guess too.
Now, Obama said this, and before he launched into the corruption discussion, he said, and I don't want you guys to be oversensitive about this, but I have to say it, that the fight against corruption should not just target the small fish, it must also target the big fish.
So you're saying Jubilee is targeting its own?
No, Jubilee is not consistent in the fight against corruption. It talks about corruption, but it does not walk the talk as properly as it should.
Sophie, let me put it this way. That since independent, no government in this country has been more committed to fight against corruption than the current government. For the first time, we have 2 cabinet secretaries arraigned in court over corruption-related matters. As to whether they will be acquitted or convicted, that belongs to another arm of government. Secondly, when Senator Kajwang says that the government speaks from both sides, we asked him to say, give us the names. He has mentioned the name of Onyango. Let me probably bring to your attention that the names that were presented for investigations and ended up going to court were names that originally came from the EACC, the Anti-Corruption Authority. As for Onyango, we have not had anything from the Anti-Corruption Unit. If that were to come, if there were to be tangible evidence, then there's nobody who is holier or cleaner than the other. The government is committed. Remember when this issue came for the first time in Parliament. In fact, CORD was the first to applaud the president for sincerely engaging in the fight against corruption. That was not until the list was opened and CORD realized most of the people named were their MPs, their governors, their senators. Then they said, this is not
how many? When you talk of most, how many?
Why don't you allow me to talk?
No, just quantify. How many? How many from CORD? When you say most are from CORD. When it was 147, I think it was 147. How many were from CORD?
Thank you.
About 147.
When that list was opened up and CORD discovered that its governors, its members of parliament, its officials were engaged in these corruption networks or whatever it was, then they changed and told their people...
Accused to have been.
Yes, alleged to have been involved. They, all of a sudden, what they had applauded the president for doing, they told their men, do not even go to court, do not even appear there, do not even resign. So who is speaking from both sides of the mouth?
Sophia.
It is the opposition and not the government.
Let's hear from Java before we come back to you, Senator, on this corruption issue.
It is because of standing on these defensive positions that even President Obama found wisdom to speak to us about issues that we know about, issues that are not strange to us. And I think it is important that leaders in this country, with respect to Chapter 6 of the Constitution, start finding reason not to defend that which we know very well that does not make sense to us as a nation, that contravene even the values that we uphold as a people. And it is important that government today, it is important that the CORD coalition today start coming out clean and clear on these issues. Not a question of defending their own, because that will not take us anywhere. And when we start looking at it this way, we'll start appreciating the failures on our part. As a people, failures on our part as leaders, and even as government. The kind of failure that even you want to recognize that, for example, we had the Global Entrepreneurship Summit, knowing very well that entrepreneurship cannot take place without the place of innovation, creativity, and education. Yet you find that the Ministry of Education did not register significant presence at the Global Entrepreneurship Summit to even see how to steer dialogue there. Where was Professor Kaimenyi at the Global Entrepreneurship Summit? So these are some of the questions that we need to start asking ourselves, questions that we know very well, whether they touch on us or not. They are questions that are important for us to ask.
I think the point is the corrupt and corruption is not a preserve of a coalition. And my brother Onyango, I have never attempted, and CORD has never attempted to say that it is only members of Jubilee that are corrupt. Kenyans are corrupt generally, whether they belong to Jubilee or they belong to CORD. I was in the joint sitting of Parliament, and I also stood up and gave the president a standing ovation because the talk was good. What we are discussing is the walk. The talk was good. President Kenyatta is an excellent speech maker.
What changed?
No, that was a talk. That was a talk. We are focusing on the walk. We want him to walk the talk the same manner in which he talked it. Remember, he said in 60 days, I expect all these things to be concluded. What happened? The EACC is dead. And now the corrupt who have been taken to court are challenging the legitimacy of the proceedings because the EACC has been killed. That tells us that yes, we can talk, but we do not have the guts to walk the talk. That is where I want Onyango and Jubilee to focus on. Because the corrupt are not only in Jubilee. Even within CORD, there are some corrupt.
And what do we see you as pronounced on your members as well? to come out strong? We see you come out strong on those in Jubilee. Why not also come out strong on your own?
No, CORD is not in running the government. Remember, and let me tell you the job description of the president, and it is in the constitution, and this you can confirm.
Didn't you just say it needs all hands on deck to fight corruption?
Sophia, every year the president is expected to address a joint sitting of parliament to update the nation on the realization of national values. One of the national values is integrity. That means that his job description is to lead from the front when it comes to matters of dealing with corruption and ensuring that the values of integrity in the nation are upheld. Okay, so
let me ask you this. You said you stood and applauded him when he made that pronouncement. And you're the one who has also said that it requires all hands on deck to be able to deal with this scourge. Yes. So why is it then we also don't see you come out to urge your members on if it's stepping aside, if it's submitting themselves to due process? Why does it only happen to one side? Don't you realize then, in effect, you politicize the issue?
Sophia, I'm personally on record as having encouraged those who are named in that report to step aside. We did not agree in the manner in which the report was transmitted to the president. But remember, stepping aside, it is these Jubilee guys who told us that stepping aside is not a legal requirement, that it is a moral principle.
All right.
So you leave it to their morality.
You know, I love the way my senator is handling this issue. He applauded the president, and none other than the leader of the CORD coalition applauded the president over these issues. And let us not reduce this issue into an issue of semantics. Corruption hurts, and it hurts badly, whether by Jubilee or by CORD people. It was only before we could even walk, the moment we opened the list, and they realized it was not only Jubilee, CORD was also there. They disowned it. Therein lies the problem. We are not going to tackle corruption if we are going to sectionalize corruption, either by tribe or by party or by affiliation to some coalition. What is important is that both CORD and Jubilee and all others realize that this country belongs to us, and corruption is hemorrhaging it at a terrible level. As to those who probably remember, you have accused us of killing EACC. Who brought the motion to Parliament? Savula. Where does he belong?
No, Savula is in your alliance nowadays.
I see where he was elected. When I think I need to say
we have 2 minutes, yes.
That Senator Kajwang is an excellent dramatist. And he has every demonstrated how capable he is to put his tail in the mouth. Because look at how he has skirted around these issues. When you talk about national values, is his argument that CORD and its leaders, especially its leaders, are not about, are part of that nation, and in fact the leadership at the national level? They are. And you see, I think it's important for both coalitions to appreciate and rise to a point where if any person in their coalition is implicated in any corruption, they distance themselves from such person and see how such person is brought to book. But you see, from the sentiments here, you'll appreciate that none of them wants to get their members brought to book, which means that in a very subtle and veiled way, they're trying to avoid to face the accountability question. And I think that is something that we must, shine the light on, because that is what is derailing us as a nation.
All right, double speak there on your part. Less than a minute, that you need to show more commitment.
No, less than a minute. I think as a nation out of Obama's visit, we need to be talking to each other more rather than talking at each other. The differences of Jubilee and CORD are very transitory differences. At the end of the day, we are all Kenyans. And I hope we'll spend the next 2 years trying to talk at each other more, because Kenya belongs to all of us.
Finally.
Thank you. What I would say to our viewers and everybody is that please, President Obama has made it clear an independent overview of what this government is currently doing and is committed to doing. We are moving despite challenges and headed towards growth. He gave the example of Malaysia and Kenya at independence and currently. I would ask Kenyans, bear with us despite the challenges. We are headed to the right direction, fighting corruption, fighting insecurity, and God be with us. We are sure to reach our destination.
All right, Javas, finally.
We're in stormy waters, and I think as we sail, we need to see whether the winds that are pushing the sails are the right winds. And we need to see how we get our leaders to be more accountable. And to the people of Kenya, I think it's important for us to start appreciating that our shoulders are hurting because of the weight of burdensome leaders that we have, who are failing to look at the accountability and corruption questions in the eye and ask the right questions.
All right. Javas Bigambo, who's a political commentator, Onyango Oloo, he's the Secretary General of the National Alliance, and Homabay Senator Moses Kajwang with us on the State of the Nation. Thank you for watching.